la directrice générale de
And
la
now it's a great pleasure for me to introduce you to Michel Asselin, the Executive Director of ACOSI. Over to you, Michel. I'm very happy to be participating in this important meeting, which brings to the end an important cycle of collective action around the country and across the world. Uh, First of all, I want to recognize that Akosi is on a unceded Mohawk land that for many generations was a place of meeting for Indigenous people in what we know today as Montreal, and underline that this recognition must also include uh, the building of true, authentic nation-to-nation relationships between ECOSI, its members, and the Indigenous nations in Canada and Quebec. Discrimination towards women and girls remains very present in many sectors of society and come from norms, standards, and sexist approaches uh, that are entrenched in our legal and education systems. The fact that women and girls are still victims of poverty and discrimination. Before going any further, I want to underline that there has been important progress accomplished to achieve the equality of girls and women. The recognition of their rights has progressed a lot in terms of international conventions, standards, instruments, specifically with the adoption of the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. That very important convention of the United Nations adopted in 1979. So there have been advances. We have to recognize this. But throughout the world, women remain less educated, have less access to school, are more victims of hunger, don't have access to food, and suffer discrimination at all kinds of different levels. The consequences of discrimination are more marked for women and girls because of the stereotypes and the roles of men and women and the sexualized and gender divisions around labor. When we think about the disproportionate responsibility that women have in terms of household chores and work, access to productive resources and capital is not equal. And because of their statute and their socialization, we know that women and girls are more affected by natural disasters and humanitarian crises. Despite real advances and progress in terms of access to education at the primary and secondary level, we notice that the uh, level of illiteracy and dropping out of school remains higher among girls than boys at the planetary level. Uh, Only 15% of owners of agricultural land worldwide are women. We also estimate that one woman in five is married before the age of 18, which of course hinders further education and increases the number of early pregnancies. We also know that violence committed against women, we will be underlining in 2 days the 16 days of action against violence against women. According to the UN, there are a third of women at the global level who have experienced violence directly. And so this is a very sad uh, overall situation when we think about the women and girls throughout the world. And that's why we can certainly affirm that if we want to attain uh, the fifth objective of the SDGs, that is the achieving equality between genders, we cannot obtain that objective if we don't obtain all the other objectives, all 17 objectives, all 17 goals, all 17 SDGs. They all directly affect women and girls. Very certainly, the 52 small and medium-sized organizations who have carried out innovative projects with their partners in 33 countries in the Global South, have contributed to the action of Canadians, men and women across the country, for the elimination of discrimination towards women and girls, for a larger empowerment of women and girls, and for the defense of their rights. The innovative relationship, this approach has to be recognized and underlined, and certainly this program, the FIT, has to continue. So thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Michel.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Michelle. So I'm very happy to be able to be speaking today. I'm Janice Hamilton. I'm the Executive Director at the Manitoba Council for International Cooperation. And we were really pleased that Michelle could join us and give those opening remarks. She was involved in our very first FIT webinar that when we were launching the program 4.5 years ago. So it's a full circle moment. So for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, I want to provide a bit of background on the Intercouncil Network, or the ICN for short. The ICN is a dynamic network of 8 provincial and regional councils for international cooperation committed to social justice and social change. The ICN, representing diverse civil society organizations from coast to coast to coast, has long advocated for an enabling environment for CSOs and diverse actors, including SMOs, diaspora organizations, youth, educators, and others with intersectional representation. We're committed to international cooperation and solidarity. We're rooted in communities across Canada, and we are leaders in public engagement and are recognized for bringing regional knowledge and priorities to the national level. And it was about 10 years ago when the ICN started raising the issue of the lack of government funding for small and medium-sized organizations and their work with partners around the world. In May 2017, then Minister of International Development, Marie-Claude Bibeau, announced the SMO initiative. And there are 3 parts of this initiative. One is the Development Impact Window, which is managed by Global Affairs Canada. The second is the Fund for Innovation and Transformation, which is managed by MCIC on behalf of the ICN. And the third is the Spur Change program, which is managed by the Alberta Council for Global Cooperation on behalf of the ICN. And today we're going to focus on FIT, which is an innovation program funded by Global Affairs Canada, developed to support small and medium-sized organizations, or SMOs, and their partners in the Global South, who are testing innovative solutions to aim to advance gender equality and empower women, girls, and vulnerable communities. It is a 5-year pilot program and has funded 54 innovations in 33 countries. 2/3 of those innovative solutions were tested in Africa, and the remainder in Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East. And FIT supported SMOs who are civil society organizations, post-secondary institutions, social enterprises, and private sector. And we provided SMOs with funding over a 6 to 15-month period with up to $250,000 in support to test innovative solutions in partnership with local organizations. FIT also seeks to foster collective learning and capacity building through knowledge sharing spaces and practices, which we're doing today. And it has been a privilege to be part of the FIT program, to witness the amazing work that the SMOs and their local partners have accomplished. Now that the testing is done, it is great to hear the results and have them share with others in the sector. So as I mentioned, one of the key aspects of the FIT program is to advance gender equality in the Global South. Now, measuring gender equality in the innovation space is both new and complex. Informed by our findings and learnings of the program, members of the FIT team developed the Gender Evaluation Framework for Innovation to evaluate how testing innovative solutions allowed SMOs and their partners in the Global South to advance gender equality and empower women and girls in alignment with Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy. So this is an interesting challenge that our presenters have been working on, and we're looking forward to understanding more about it and how gender equality has been demonstrated in the testing projects. So I'd now like to introduce our presenters. Lisa Gaudry has been with FIT since 2019 and is FIT's program manager. She has over 12 years of international development and humanitarian experience in East and West Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. And Lisa is joining us from Kigali, Rwanda. Sarah Harrison is an international gender specialist with over 15 years of experience mainstreaming gender equality. She has specialties in innovation, inclusive market systems, and women's economic empowerment. And Sarah has been assisting FIT as a gender consultant over much of FIT's program. Now, Sarah's joining us from Toronto, which is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And they will present their findings, and there'll be an opportunity to ask questions. So as they're presenting, if you think of questions, please put them in the Q&A box. And I now, it's a great pleasure to turn it over to Lisa and Sarah.
Thank you, Janice. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We have a lot of content to cover today. For the presentation, we'll be turning off our videos and then we'll turn them on again for the Q&A. Next slide, please. Great. So to get started, we will provide an overview of the gender evaluation. Then we will walk you through the gender evaluation framework for innovation, followed by a review of the FIT program results toward advancing gender equality and empowering women and girls. And we will end with a conclusion and the Q&A. It is important to note that the FIT program was also a testing program that aimed to provide access to funding to Canadian small and medium-sized organizations, as Janice mentioned, testing new solutions to development and humanitarian challenges with the ultimate goal of advancing gender equality and empowering women and girls through these innovations. And just a quick note, when we say SMO throughout the presentation, we're referring to the SMO and all partners. So keeping this in mind, our primary evaluation questions were, did the FIT-funded SMOs and their testing projects advance gender equality and empower women and girls? And if yes, how was this possible in the innovation space? Our evaluation objective was then to develop a gender evaluation framework to capture if and how FIT programmatically and through SMOs and partners advanced gender equality and empowered women and girls.
So to share a little bit about our process, we first wanted to focus on answering the evaluation questions and to meet the evaluation objective. And to do this, we first had to build out an evaluation framework. The framework was initially developed and adapted from leading gender equality and women's economic empowerment models and frameworks. In terms of the process, we first built out the framework, which was a very iterative, cyclical process. Then we had to develop the framework's resulting analysis and code system based on the quantitative and qualitative data that we were using, which involved two approaches. So the first approach was grounded theory, where you start with a defined or predetermined set of codes or themes that you think will emerge from the data. And then the second approach was framework analysis, where you're open to new codes or themes as you progress and as you review the data. So using this combined approach of grounded theory and framework analysis really speaks to the iterative cyclical process where we developed a predefined set of themes that we expected, but also added accordingly and refined as we progressed throughout the work. To test the framework and supporting evaluation systems, we initially conducted a pilot evaluation or trial run of the framework with data from 5 SMOs. And of course, we identified gaps along the way and iteratively troubleshooted as we moved throughout the process.
As many of you will understand, we have been working within a unique landscape that includes SMOs from different sectors, contexts, and continents using different indicators toward different goals. One of the primary challenges was that it was difficult to evaluate progress toward gender equality and empowerment in short-term projects and in testing environments. Additionally, existing frameworks for evaluating gender and specifically gender equality progress in the innovation space across sectors and innovations did not quite fit the context of the FIT program itself. Similarly, FIT was a new program that launched rather quickly and as a testing program, so there were no existing measurement system or frameworks, and we didn't know what kind of applications we would be receiving or for what types of innovations. But while this was challenging, it did present a new opportunity to learn how to evaluate gender equality in the innovation space and in a testing environment. Next slide, please.
So to give you an idea of the tools and data we have used, the framework captures and measures primarily quantitative data to assess the SMO's commitment to advancing gender equality. In addition, the framework also used qualitative data to complement the quantitative data and to also evaluate access, agency, drivers, and challenges, which we'll talk about further shortly. The qualitative data was analyzed using data analysis software. Our key data sources included SMO's end-line reports, SMO's measurement frameworks, SMO budgets and staffing information, along with FIT's Innovation Tracker, which is FIT's internal project database. All of this was rolled up and summarized to determine gender equality progress at the FIT fund level.
The initial development of the FIT program and FIT's overarching gender equality strategy were guided by Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy, or FIAP, which recognizes the critical importance of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls for achieving sustainable development goals and reducing global poverty. SMOs that were selected for FIT funding aligned with both the Sustainable Development Goals and FIAP's action areas. To evaluate results from the 52 testing projects with varying outcome measurements, more than 1,000 indicators, excluding the outputs, and progress across several sectors, FIAP action areas were integrated into the evaluation framework, and results were categorized and evaluated based on the 6 action areas as seen on the screen. This allowed us to categorize SMOs and their results by themes and overarching goals, which provided a consistent way to evaluate progress. Next slide, please.
So keeping our evaluation questions, the objective, and the landscape in mind, here you can see our resulting evaluation framework. The Gender Evaluation Framework for Innovation, otherwise known as the GEFI, assessed achievements in 3 core areas: commitment, access, and agency, which all aim to evaluate an SMO's progress towards gender equality and empowering women and girls. Commitment assessed the extent of an SMO's gender-responsive approach and design and overall commitment to advancing gender equality. Commitment encompassed several important organizational practices and capacities for advancing gender equality. The GEFI considered an SMO's gender equality marker, whether they developed a gender equality strategy, conducted an in-depth gender scan or gender analysis, and collected gender disaggregated data. Additionally, the GEFI considered the extent to which organizations utilize gender expertise, either internal or external, maintained a budget for gender activities such as training, and developed a policy for preventing sexual exploitation and abuse. It's important to note that many of these components were mandatory requirements to be considered for FIT funding, but notwithstanding, these elements still reflect a commitment to being gender responsive. In addition to commitment, the GEFI also evaluated progress using an SMO's access and agency strategies. Many of you will be familiar with access, which is a core component of gender equality and empowerment, where access strategies ensure that women and girls have the necessary information, skills, and resources needed to succeed and advance. Broadly speaking, the GEFI focused on 3 areas of access, including access to resources, services, and support, access to opportunities, and access to income. Examples of access strategies seen across the FIT portfolio included increased access to information, skills development, finance, mentoring, equipment, and technology. And finally, the third component of the GEFI is agency. Agency is another core component of advancing gender equality and empowerment, where agency really speaks to women and girls having the power and agency to receive benefits, the ability to make and act on decisions, and to have control over resources and profits. For example, advancements in agency may include the promotion of human rights or shifting gender stereotypes. There were several important agency areas seen across the FIT portfolio, such as improving women's leadership, self-esteem and confidence, improving sexual and reproductive health and rights for women and girls, and shifting gender norms in child marriage, for example.
Next slide, please. Now that we have provided an overview of the evaluation framework, we're going to share some of the high-level results from the evaluation. We have separated the findings into two overarching areas, so the FIAP results and the GEFI results. Firstly, for the FIAP results, as mentioned, the SMOs and innovations were classified into 6 action areas based on their measurement frameworks and outcomes. Within each FIAP action area, we also developed sub-themes or categories to classify the SMOs more specifically across their common goals. As you can see on the screen, for the 3 larger portfolios, there were 10 SMOs in gender that worked primarily toward reducing sexual and gender-based violence, 22 SMOs in human dignity that worked primarily toward education and sexual and reproductive health and rights, 14 SMOs in growth, which worked toward increasing women's access to economic opportunities. For the 3 smaller portfolios, there were 3 SMOs in inclusive governance, which worked toward the promotion and protection of human rights, primarily the rights of women, 2 SMOs in environment and climate action, which supported women's environmental resilience, and 1 SMO in peace and security, which aimed to increase women's representation in the security sector. Lastly, the majority of FIT beneficiaries or participants were women, with approximately 48,000 women and girls reached, or 64%, and approximately 27,000 men and boys reached. Next slide, please. In terms of the results from the gender evaluation framework, these included results based on commitment, access and agency, drivers, and challenges. As Sarah mentioned, to assess commitment, we looked at several important components for advancing gender equality. As you can see from the column on the left, these included the SMO's GEM marker, gender expertise, whether the SMO allotted a portion of their budget to specific gender activities, if they conducted a gender scan, developed a gender strategy, and whether they disaggregated their data and reach numbers. As many of these components were requirements for the FIT program, many of these numbers essentially reflect high compliance. However, we still saw some differences as some of these components were FIT suggestions that SMOs addressed differently within their capacities, budgets, and time frame. There were some slightly lower numbers in the human dignity portfolio in terms of developing a gender equality strategy and conducting an in-depth gender scan. However, it's important to note that the majority of these SMOs were from the first intake. Many of these started testing when the FIT program was in its very early days, and they were also hit by the COVID pandemic, so had to put a number of activities on hold. So there are quite a few numbers on the screen, but for today's session, we wanted to draw your attention to the highlighted row that looks specifically at gender expertise. In the gender portfolio, 30% had both Canadian and local country gender expertise. In the human dignity portfolio, 32% had both Canadian and local gender expertise. In environment, both SMOs had Canadian and local gender expertise. In inclusive governance, 33% had Canadian and local gender expertise. And lastly, in the peace and security portfolio, just the 1 SMO did have both Canadian and local gender expertise. Next slide, please. While we are more familiar with seeing these types of gender requirements for longer-term projects or programs, the data did reflect that these were important components and still applicable for testing environments in the innovation space. The key was adapting these components or requirements to the innovation space and figuring out what was possible in short-term testing environments, which of course is still a work in progress across the sector as a whole. For FIT projects, this meant considering what can be done in a shorter time frame with a smaller budget and in changing environments often met with many pivots. So for example, rather than conducting a full gender analysis as one would for a longer term project or program, in the innovation space, this was adapted to a gender scan. A gender scan is similar in process, but condensed and not as extensive. While the commitment data reflected high compliance toward FIT requirements, it did also reflect that these elements, such as the gender scan, developing a gender strategy, and having gender expertise, made a big difference in the project's success. Also, in terms of gender equitable progress, whether for individual SMOs or FIAP action areas portfolios as a whole, more significant progress was made among SMOs that engaged expertise in their Canadian officer staff as well as in the testing country. This was one of the key factors that pushed progress forward. Next slide, please. As we touched on at the beginning of the presentation, the FIT program did not have a standard measurement framework or a set of key performance indicators when it launched. So after experiencing constraints and trying to roll up about 1,000 indicators across the 52 projects, we came up with a system of classifying outcomes and indicators by access and agency strategies, because these were essentially the activities that each SMO was working on to make progress towards gender and empower women and girls. So in this table, we've highlighted the most prominent access and agency strategies that cut across each of the portfolios. So as you can see in the top row for access, the most prominent strategies were access to skills development, access to information and awareness, and where the portfolios didn't have access to information, interestingly, the prominent strategy was access to improved knowledge or educational attainment. So for example, for access to information and skills development, SMOs engaged in a range of activities, including public awareness campaigns, informational sessions, and direct skills development training as it related to the innovation. When it came to agency, the most prominent strategy that also cut across every single portfolio, which was very interesting, was specifically improving knowledge on gender equality. And then that was followed by shifting gender norms in a particular area. So examples from the projects included training on gender equality or gender-based issues as a precursor to shifting norms in these various areas, such as rights, gender roles, or child marriage. And what we also evaluated was whether the organization and projects use only access or only agency strategies, or a combination of both. So now if I can direct your attention to the last row on the table, you'll notice that in the gender portfolio, 30% used only agency, while the rest used both access and agency. In human dignity, every SMO used a combination of both access and agencies. However, there was a stronger focus on agency. In the growth portfolio, 29% used only access strategies, where the rest used a combination of both. And in the three remaining portfolios, environment, inclusive governance, and peace, they all used a combination of both access and agency. Based on the data, more progress was made in the growth portfolio overall, whereas lower progress was made in gender and in human dignity portfolios. And what emerged here was that the SMOs in the growth portfolio focused primarily on improving access, whereas many, if not most, of the projects in gender and human dignity portfolios focused predominantly on improving agency, which may be harder to achieve in short-term projects because shifting aspects of agency, like improving confidence or changing gender norms, can take time. Next slide, please. So one of the key findings here was that innovation projects that are introducing something new, testing a new approach or solution, there had to be an element of providing the necessary access to knowledge, information, and skills as the baseline. In regard to the prominent agency strategy, what the data demonstrated was that in order for change to be more equitable, it was crucial to include that foundational knowledge on gender equality for the participants. Foundational gender knowledge contributes to behavioral changes and ideally, ultimately, to the shifting of gender norms. So while we noticed that less progress was seen where SMOs were trying to achieve agency, the most effective way to make progress or significant progress was a combined approach of both access and agency strategies. Next slide, please.
So in addition to commitment, access, and agency, the GEFI also captured drivers and challenges. Drivers are critical components for an innovation's success and essentially lessons learned in the innovation space. Drivers were identified as key success factors that have contributed to an SMO's progress toward advancing gender equality and empowering women and girls. If we consider access and agency as the what an SMO can do in the innovation space to advance gender equality, then drivers are part of the how an SMO can make it happen. Drivers can also be key learnings for future innovations. Sometimes drivers were a pivot that were identified by the SMO and implemented within the testing timeframe. But in any case, it was generally seen that an SMO's progress or success may not have been feasible or as effective without the drivers. To identify drivers, we analyzed the qualitative data to determine the key success factors that SMOs self-identified, or in some cases, the lessons that they felt were missing during the testing period. So here on the screen, you can see a number of drivers were identified across the various action areas. Each area has its own set of different drivers. So for instance, in the growth action area, we identified 2 drivers, which was to collaborate with local partners and to provide flexible learning opportunities for women. Next slide, please. So to take this one step further, we also analyzed the drivers across all the FIAB action areas in the portfolio. And from this analysis, 5 key drivers emerged from the data, which can be seen on the screen, and they're in no particular order. But the first one was about engaging women leaders in groups. So this ranged from integrating leaders from women's organizations to using adolescent girls as workshop facilitators. But this driver was always about using key women stakeholders or influential figures to improve both the project's legitimacy and effectiveness. The second driver that emerged from the data was engaging men and boys. So this included engaging male champions, male allies, spouses, or even entire families. But in many cases, engaging men and boys catalyzed change across the innovation for both women and men. The third driver that we wanted to highlight today that emerged from the data was the importance of designing locally and being context appropriate. There were numerous examples of ensuring the innovation was designed and implemented to consider the context, the culture, customs, and language. As one example, one SMO used local Indigenous expertise to strengthen their approach. The fourth driver that emerged from the data was utilizing gender expertise. SMOs engaged various forms of gender expertise, generally a gender specialist or advisor who brought technical skills and a deeper understanding of how to improve impact. Notably, several SMOs shared that they were surprised by the amount of influence and impact that the gender specialist brought or had for their project. And finally, the fifth driver was about collaborating with local partners, which was highlighted by many SMOs. There was a need for strong collaboration with all stakeholders across the board. Similarly to engaging women's organizations, collaborating with a strong local partner increased legitimacy, effectiveness, and also helped to address challenges or potential risks. Additionally, collaborating with a good local partner improved local ownership and also helped to build community trust. Next slide, please. So for a quick review, through the GEFI, we've evaluated the SMO's commitment, explored where SMOs have progressed in advancing gender equality by assessing their access and agency strategies, and assessed the drivers that strengthened an innovation's approach. Finally, the evaluation also captured key challenges that SMOs faced during the testing period. Importantly, both drivers and challenges can serve as helpful guideposts for future innovations. Here you can see on the screen there was a range of challenges such as poverty, high triple burden, short testing timeframe, and mitigating resistance. Interestingly, the short testing timeframe challenge cut across 4 out of the 6 action areas, and mitigating resistance cut across 2 of the 6 portfolios as well. And as we noted, or as one thing that was interesting was that of the 2 portfolios, gender and human dignity, that experienced mitigating resistance as one of their challenges, their primary focus was agency change. Next slide, please. So when we analyze the challenges across all the FIAP action areas in the portfolio, 2 primary challenges emerged, which I've already referenced. The first one was the short testing timeframe to achieve gender equality progress, where SMOs highlighted that influencing gender norms or roles, for instance, is a complex and lengthy process. Many SMOs were able to initiate progress or to start to influence these areas, but also recognize that this work must be ongoing, and in some cases they reflected that their targets may have been too high for the timeframe, given the kind of change that they were trying to create. The second challenge that we saw across the portfolio was mitigating resistance to gender equality. Some SMOs experienced mixed reactions initially to their gender equality training, or many were working on topics that were considered taboo in their communities. So some SMOs found that they would have ideally conducted further sensitization efforts or awareness campaigns, depending on innovation or context, or that they would have expanded their gender equality training, say from 1 or 2 sessions to more, in the case that that was not enough. Next slide, please.
Finally, as part of the evaluation, we also developed a gender equality pathway for innovation, which outlines the path that a FIT-funded SMO can take or took to advance gender equality and empower women and girls within a particular FIAP action area. So as an example for today, we focused on the pathway used by SMOs in the human dignity portfolio, but we have developed a pathway for each of the portfolios based on the data and finding. So for instance, starting from the bottom, it is important that an SMO has a strong foundational commitment to advancing gender equality. In addition to these core commitments, the key success drivers that were identified and used to push progress within a short time frame were designing locally and being context appropriate, engaging women leaders and groups, and providing remuneration where appropriate. And finally, similar to the GEFI, the access and agency strategies to support gender responsive or transformative change to improve gender equality benefits and impacts to ultimately achieve the overall intended outcome of the project or innovation were providing access to skills development, healthcare or health services, and improved knowledge. And for agency, this included improving knowledge on gender, finding ways to improve SRHR, and working towards shifting gender norms in various areas. This would then lead to improving the specific area or outcome in human dignity. So what we envisioned with the GEFI was perhaps a starting point for a project in a portfolio. So for example, this pathway could feed into your theory of change, into the initial design to help ensure that the innovation is gender responsive by ensuring a foundational commitment to gender, knowing the relevant success drivers in the sector, and having a combination of focused access and agency strategies to lead to your desired outcome. And finally, it can provide perhaps a more meaningful or strategic approach in how to create gender equitable progress in a shorter time frame in innovation. Next slide, please.
So to conclude, we wanted to come back to our primary evaluation questions, which were, did the FIT-funded SMOs and their testing projects advance gender equality and empower women and girls? And if yes, how is this possible in the innovation space? Next slide.
So to answer the first question, yes, the data demonstrated that FIT-funded SMOs did make progress through innovation to advance gender equality and empower women and girls, and in many cases, significant progress was made. While not all SMOs made progress where they aimed or intended to make progress, often in agency areas, this is or should be expected, especially for testing programs and for testing new innovations. But interestingly, overall and collectively, progress was made toward each of the FIAP action areas. Next slide, please. In regard to the GEFI results, one of the key learnings was that progress was more effective and significant using a combined approach of both access and agency strategies. Access and agency served as the what in the project that needs or needed to happen in order to make progress. And in the examples we used, this meant providing access to information and skills combined with improving knowledge of gender equality and shifting norms. Next slide, please.
So in regard to the GEFI results around drivers and commitment, this brings us back to another key finding in which SMOs must have that strong foundational commitment to advance gender equality and innovation. This involves, as discussed earlier, as having gender budget for gender activities and training, utilizing gender expertise, conducting gender analysis, including the collection of gender disaggregated data, and developing a gender equality strategy, including a gender responsive testing approach. As noted earlier, the element of commitment where we saw the most variation as it relates to progress was where local gender expertise was engaged. Thus, having a combined approach of Canadian and local gender expertise is key. If we remember that access and agency are the what you do in the innovation space, it is commitment and the drivers that are the how you can make it happen in a short testing timeframe. So to remember, the drivers that emerge from the data that are important and most pertinent for SMOs in the innovation space were engaging women and leaders in groups, including women's organizations and key women and girl stakeholders, engaging men and boys, including spouses, designing locally and being context appropriate, utilizing gender expertise, and collaborating with local partners. So you'll see our formula for this on the bottom of the screen, which is using a combination of access and agency plus your foundational commitment and key success drivers is what can lead to more gender equitable progress in innovation.